Hi guys, this is Zach from Watches on You, and today I'm going to be comparing two Rolex watches. On my left, we have the Rolex Submariner Date, and on my right, we have the Tudor Black Bay. Now, if you're not familiar with these brands, you might have been like, why do you say two Rolex watches? And that is because Tudor is actually a subsidiary of Rolex. And I'm sure some of you out there might not also be aware of the vast history that Tudor has. I mean, I'm sure many of you are, but I'm sure there might be some watching today that don't realize that Tudor has actually been around almost as long as Rolex. I believe there might have been a couple decades separating them, but they were around at just about the same time, and they were around together for an extremely long time, both making roughly the same watches. Really what Tudor was is where they were taking Rolex watches and putting ETA movements in them to give them a cheaper price point. It was just that simple. However, there was kind of a dead point for Tudor in, I believe, about the 90s and then earlier 2000s. Tudor really wasn't out there. I mean, yes, they were making timepieces, but they were making some really weird watches, and the public really wasn't familiar with them at all. But then this is the watch that changed everything for them, the Tudor Black Bay. When this came out, it kind of took the watch community by storm because it took the, design from many of the old Tudor Submariners and blended them into this timepiece, which it looks different than a Rolex, and it has a lot of heritage aspects to it that are hard to come by in watches that are new today. So let's compare these two, as I'm sure some of you might be wondering which one. You might be deciding to purchase between these two. I mean, yes, the Sub is in a totally different price bracket than this Tudor is, but they're still fairly similar in design. So let's go over these differences for that reason. So right off the bat, you can see that the Rolex has a much more modern, one could argue subdued design than the Tudor does. I mean, it's got a ceramic bezel, it's got white gold indexes all the way around. It's all white, black, or steel. Versus the Tudor has a burgundy bezel, it's got a gilt dial, gilt hands, and then stainless steel case, and then you even have that little pop of red on the crown tube there. So these two watches, you can just tell right off the bat that these are going for different purposes. The Rolex is to make the highest quality sports timepiece and that they can possibly do for the modern era. The Tudor is to harken back to the watches of old, bring back some of those vintage aspects and put them into a high quality modern housing. So you could argue the kind of philosophy between these two watches is very different. So personally, I prefer some aspects about the Tudor. I like the thinner lugs on it. I'm not a huge fan of the chunkier case of the new Subs. I personally prefer the aluminum bezel, and actually I've always preferred the 16610 and older Subs to the ceramic ones. The ceramic case is a bit too chunky for me, and I'm not a huge fan of the ceramic bezel. I like the warmth of aluminum bezels. Personally, I prefer them. And that's one thing I really like about the Tudors is that they do use aluminum bezels. Now, some people might not like that because they're saying, hey, it's a modern watch, why doesn't it have a ceramic bezel? And there's definitely an argument to be made there. That ceramic, because it doesn't scratch, and it's just a very relatively high-tech material, I'll say, in the watch business. And aluminum has been around. It's such an old material that they've been using that in a modern watch they shouldn't have aluminum. But I personally just prefer the look of an aluminum bezel, and that goes for vintage Rolexes as well. Another thing that's very interesting is you can see that this actually has a bevel going along the edge of the case, and it's a polished bevel, which gives it a little kind of pop of light when you're looking at down like this. And that's actually something Rolex used to do, and many people actually want Rolex to start doing again. I personally think it looks really nice. It just kind of gives a little pop of light when the light reflects off of it, and I think it looks very nice, versus this Rolex just has a hard edge right there. So that's also one difference between these and kind of plays into the vintage aspect. Finally, let's go on to the dials. So the dial, as you can see on the right, is a gilt dial, which Rolex did on the very first Submariners. And this has a glossy dial, and with white gold indexes and hands. And this also has a matte dial. Again, this harkens back to the old Rolexes. This harkens back to the new Rolex. Or I guess I won't say harkens back. It plays up for the modern era. You also can see that the Rolex has crown guards versus the Tudor does not, and that once again is the original Submariners did not have crown guards, but then they put them on, so obviously Rolex is going to carry that through into the modern iteration versus Tudor has the ability to go back to the original ones and take some aspects from them, including that. So I'll just show you this cases a bit. So the Tudor is going to be much thicker than the Rolex. The Rolex is going to be 13 millimeters versus, the Tudor isn't much thicker. It's just the side of the case is thicker. So you can see there's some thickness on the Rolex in the case back versus the case back on the Tudor is really flush. However, on the new, this is the ETA model. I have a Black Bay Dark right here. This is the PVD model, but this has the new in-house movement. And you can see that this one is going to be a bit thicker than the ETA model. This one's going to be creeping up on 15 millimeters versus this one I believe is just over 13, and I believe the sub is 13 millimeters thick. So not much difference in thickness there if you go ETA, or if you go Black Bay 58, which is the in-house movement one, but smaller case size and smaller thickness, or less thick of a model. So there's also, and that's another thing to point out, there are so many more iterations of the Tudor Black Bay versus the Rolex Submariner that you can really, you're a lot more free to pick the exact model that you would like. So let's go over the movements in these two existing models. So this is the ETA movement, as I said before, which is a good movement, but it's not it's not that great. It's not an in-house movement, but it will give you easy serviceability and everything. And on the new movements, however, that this Black Bay Dark has, this does use an in-house movement. It's got a 72-hour power reserve, which is more than the sub has. It's chronometer certified, and objectively, this is a better movement than what's in the sub. Now, you take into consideration the finishing. The Rolex is going to have much better finishing, but really everything else about the Tudor is going to beat it, or at least match it. Now, Rolex, I'm sure, and I personally, just to put a prediction here, I think that at Basel World, Rolex is going to be putting in the new movements that they have now with 72 hours of power reserve. However, that's still something to be seen. Just overall, though, I will say the Rolex quality does kind of blow the Tudor out of the water. The bracelet is very high quality on the Tudor as it is on the Rolex, but the Rolex just has more features and everything with the ceramic bezel and, just the movement finishing, which I know you can't see but is there, and it's got this glide lock clasp, which is fantastic, which lets you adjust on the fly. It really does. So that's really what you're paying for the Rolex. You're paying for the best modern iteration with super high quality finishing, and you're definitely paying for that in the price. So this comes in at $8,600, I believe, brand new. But this one is pre-owned at JB Hudson Jewelers. They lent us both of these watches for the purpose of this review for $11,000. Versus these Tudors, brand new, I believe they're around $3,800, brand new. This one is going to be coming in lower than that for sure. This is also going to be pre-owned, so you can contact them. I'll leave a link in their website to JB Hudson if you want to contact them about purchasing this model as well. This one's going to be much cheaper. So you're paying three times the price about for this Rolex over this Tudor. Now, whether that's justified, that's up to you. If you're looking for something, you don't want to spend that much money, and you want a more vintage aspect, go with the Tudor. But if you want kind of the best dive watch you can get in the modern day, it has to be the Sub. The Sub is just the quintessential dive watch. It's the most famous one ever made, and I think it will continue to be the most famous one ever made. That's not hitting on the Tudor. I think the Tudor is absolutely a fantastic value where it is. I actually have a Black Bay GMT, so I definitely am not going to say that the Tudor's not a great watch. I think they're fantastic timepieces. They're not quite to the level of the Submariner, but it's up to you to decide whether you think the Submariner's price justifies that, or if you like the size of or if you like the design of the Tudor better as well. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Are you a Black Bay or Submariner fan? Thank you guys for watching this video. Remember to like, subscribe, and share. Thanks.